Well, Congressman Troy Downing is in his first term as Montana's 2nd Congressional District, representing Montana's 2nd Congressional District. He's taken time to join us today. Thanks, Congressman, for taking the time. I know there's a lot happening in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah.
And it's got an impact on your district, which covers eastern Montana, including, among those things, the president's big, beautiful bill that has narrowly passed the House. It's been kind of amended. It's in the Senate now. You voted in favor of that. So
yes, I did.
In your words, why is that a good bill for Montana?
Well, if we don't pass that, probably one of the most meaningful things for me and to Montanans, to my district, are the tax cuts. If the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was the 2017 policy, if that doesn't get renewed, it expires this year. And if that expires, it would be one of the largest tax increases in American history. To a Montanan, an average Montanan, that would be about a 26% increase in their income taxes. To a small business Montana, it's higher. It's about a 43% increase. So that's incredibly important that we make sure that that is not just extended but made permanent. And that's what we're trying to do. The other part that is very meaningful to my district, we have so many farms and ranches in central and eastern Montana, is not having the death tax come back. You know, having that come back, it forces heirs, when they're going through a horrible part in their time in their life anyway, to have to make a decision on selling part of that farm, that ranch, or in some cases even the family's small business to pay for their taxes. And what really concerns me on the agricultural side is if we see families forced to sell parts of the farm to pay their taxes, you know, in the death of a family member, I think we're at real risk of seeing production agricultural land coming out of production. And one of the things that really scares me is throughout the history of humanity, if you want to bring a country down, you make it so it can't feed itself. And I think that we're at risk of that. And we see all the pressures. It's so hard to raise, to grow food anyway, and we can't have that other pressure, because I think it's not just an issue for my district, not just an issue for Montana, but I think it's a national issue.
All right. This bill has gone back and forth on the sale of public lands, but there is a provision that's being talked about in the Senate version. And some of your Montana delegation colleagues, Senator Daines, Representative Zinke, they've strongly opposed public lands. So what's your stance on that?
Well, I have been very vocal about that, and I appreciate that the Montana delegation is pretty much in lockstep on this. We care deeply about our public lands. Our public lands are not for sale. And I actually signed on the amendment on the House side with Congressman Zinke to keep it out on the House bill. And I believe we're going to have the same pressure from Senators Sheehy and Daines on the Senate bill. And I've also joined it's a bipartisan Public Lands and Public Hands caucus that me and Congressman Zinke are part of. It's important to us that that gets taken out. And I know that our senatorial delegation is working on that, and I'm really hoping that they keep that out, because that would be an issue.
Well, on the Medicaid front, some reports say the bill as it stands in the Senate cuts Medicaid by almost $800 billion. So what would you say to your constituents who rely on Medicaid?
Well, Medicaid is incredibly important to Montana, and very specifically, it's very important to rural health care. And I've traveled to a lot of facilities. I've talked to a lot of folks about supporting that, and that's a huge issue. You go to a lot of these rural healthcare facilities where 80–90% of their income is Medicare and Medicaid. So that's incredibly important. So first, there's that part. The second part on those cuts, if you look at the billions and billions of dollars in fraudulent payments that have been made in that system, it needs to be reformed. And so what is happening under this bill is it's not taking benefits away from people who are entitled to them. It's basically cleaning up the system so that more money can be spent on those who are entitled. And so there are some reforms in there with work requirements, and that's how this program was put together in the first place. And there are programs or pieces of that say that you can't be illegally here, you have to be an American citizen. And that, to the extent that we've looked at it in Montana, is not a factor in being able to still support these rural healthcare facilities. But I'm looking at that really, really carefully, because as has been spoken about from the administration and amongst my conference in Congress, is we're not gutting the system, we're not taking benefits away from people who are entitled benefits, but we're taking that fraud, waste, and abuse out of the system so that we have more money to actually pay for those who are entitled to those benefits.
Well, Congressman, in light of recent tensions between Israel and Iran, nuclear weapons are back at the forefront of conversations worldwide.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, your district includes Malmstrom Air Force Base, which of course is home to a large portion of the nation's nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
And they're in the process of going through a modernization of the missile systems.
The Sentinel program is incredibly important. Yeah. And I just want to say that, there's folks that are talking about whether we still need a triad or whether we need that ground-based. And I'll say absolutely yes. We're not going to have that same deterrence in sea and air airbound deterrence. We need to modernize. We need to have that Sentinel program come in. I've spent some time at Malmstrom, and they're still. It amazes me they've been sitting there on alert for 60+ years. And that deterrence is why we haven't had a problem. And that ground-based deterrence is not just important to national security, to global security, but obviously to the the economy of Montana, and especially of course to Cascade County. But so that's all in my forefront. But one of the things, because you started that with the conflict with Iran and Israel. Yeah. First of all, I'm very supportive of Israel. It's one of our biggest, most important allies in a part of the world where people hate us. They have a right to exist, and if they had intel, and we've had some reports as well that the Iranians were close to being able to produce up to 10 nuclear weapons, and we cannot afford Iran to have nuclear capability. We cannot, and I know they've talked about basically working for putting nuclear power plants in there and doing enrichment programs for civil projects like that, but they've clearly gone beyond that. And I think that's not just a problem for the Middle East, not just a problem for Israel, but I think that's a global problem. If they actually had nuclear capabilities, you have no idea whose hands those are going to fall into and what kind of havoc that can wreak on a global scale, not just a local, regional issue.
Yeah, do you think the U.S. should get involved in that? Or
well, I think we should be watching closely. I know that the President is watching closely. In Congress, we're obviously watching this closely. I think that at this point, the Israelis have the ability to deal with this issue, but we're definitely looking closely. But I will just say one thing. Nobody wants to get into a war. Nobody wants to get into a conflict. Nobody wants escalation. But this planet Earth, cannot afford to have nuclear weapons in Iran.
Okay. Well, you also serve on a House subcommittee on innovation, entrepreneurship, and workforce development over in Lewistown, which is part of your district. There's a major project in the works. The German high-tech developer Vacom is in the process of setting up. Talk about any assistance you can provide for that project, because with them bringing in all these employees, that's going to create a need for housing, and the whole country's in a housing crisis.
Right. Well, you've kind of split in a couple of topics here. Housing is a big issue, and solving that problem. I'm on the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, and trying to figure out how we can, make housing more affordable, how we can open up the ability to finance housing. I mean, that's one of the biggest limiting factors is access to capital. That's a big issue. I've in the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, I've brought up the issues of housing in tribal lands and in and around reservations and with Native communities. So I mean, those are big issues. But the other thing that you mentioned is the workforce. I'm going to expand that a little bit. One of the biggest limiting factors we have in small businesses, medium businesses, businesses across Montana is not the availability of jobs, it's the availability of workers. And we need people that are going to show up and work on farms and ranches, work in construction, work in the service industry, because one of our biggest problems we have right now when you talk to a business owner is they can't recruit and retain employees, and that's across the strata. I mean, from rural hospitals trying to recruit and retain doctors to work there. That's a huge problem, them getting somebody to move to a small town. How do you incentivize that? How do you bring somebody in to do that? A lot of these rural hospitals are running on PAs and nurses because they can't find a full-time physician to be there. And I bring that up because that's a problem across the strata. And anything we can do to start solving the workforce issues and get workers here. People talk about unemployment rates getting smaller and smaller. We're employed, but businesses are not reaching their full potential because they're having trouble recruiting and retaining employees.
Yeah, another thing we've seen that's maybe more of a nationwide thing is these ICE raids. Do you support those, and do you think it's sending mixed messages? Because we've heard the president talk about maybe scaling those back to maybe not include some certain workers, farm workers, hospitality workers? Your thoughts
Well,
on that?
we need to have some serious conversations about immigration, and we need to figure out how we're going to do that. I mean, what was happening was not sustainable. I mean, we were basically being invaded from the southern border, and we had folks that weren't just economic refugees. We had bad actors from potentially hostile countries that were coming in and disappearing into the population. So the problem was severe, and so we've cut that off. Now we need to really focus on what reasonable rules for immigration are, so that we're continuing even some of the worker issues that I talked about. We need to have reasonable immigration of people who actually want to come here, build their American dream and become Americans. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that. And one of the other things that's incredibly important is that we don't start throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And a lot of those work visa programs are incredibly important. So we need to make sure we're vetting the people that are coming here, but still making sure those programs are available, because a lot of our farmers and ranchers depend on those programs, those H-2B programs, those different work visa programs. The construction industry needs those. The service industry, they bring in seasonal workers because they just can't find them locally. And they've got two choices if they can't get those. They either downsize or they shut down. And so we need to be very thoughtful on what we're doing on our whole immigration policy to make sure that we don't have a porous border where anybody from anywhere just disappears into the population, but we're being very thoughtful about the folks that are coming here contributing to our economy, to our small businesses, to our industries, and really doing what we all did. We all came here, from some some immigrants that wanted to build their American dream, and so make sure we get back to those thoughts and do something very very thoughtful on solving those problems without creating a bigger one.
I wanted to talk to you too a little about energy, and a lot of people are concerned about Northwestern Energy, the state's largest utility, their plans to raise utility rates. Is there anything Congress can do to step in on that front?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've talked about a lot is unleashing American energy, and one of the big things, because we have energy from so many sources, so many potential sources here. Obviously, we have coal. I've got a number of bills in there to help with coal-powered fire plants, with being able to mine coal on federal land. Obviously, we've got oil and gas. Natural gas is up and coming, inexpensive, reliable. One of the biggest contributors to the success of a family in building the American dream is reliable and affordable energy. So that's one of the biggest issues we need to really think about clearly, and having policies so that we can continue to produce reliable energy that is affordable. And there's so many limiting factors that have been out there. I mentioned the coal issues, but even just permitting reform, just being able to get things up quickly. Things are slowed down so much. And one of the things that concerns me about energy right now is we're coming into the digital age here. With artificial intelligence, with distributed ledgers, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, all this stuff, already the demand for energy is incredibly high. And we keep talking about generation. And that's what I just mentioned, coal generation, natural gas generation, alternatives, renewables. There's all these different ideas for generation, but we don't have the ability to transmit it either. And to be able to build a data center right next to the point of generation everywhere is not feasible. We need to really invest in our infrastructure to be able to transmit that as well. I'm a very big fan of all the above. I think that we humans are very innovative. We're going to find ways to do things, cheaper, faster, cleaner, and we're going to continue to do that. Allow, the markets to, dictate who is producing that reliable, inexpensive energy. I think that that's a huge contributor to the American dream, American prosperity, and but the biggest thing that is on my mind, once you get beyond that, is how we as a country continue to be competitive in the AI space, in the digital asset space, in the distributed ledger space. All of that stuff is moving at warp speed, and there are adversarial countries out there that are trying to basically blow us out of the water, and they're not going to slow down production of energy or of energy or transmission of it through slow through roadblocks, through slow permitting or anything else. They're going to keep just building it as fast as they can. and they're going to leave us in the dust if we can't compete. And that concerns me, because we need to be able to compete in that spot, or we're going to be left at a great global disadvantage.
Well, you mentioned water, and I wanted to talk to you about the Milk River project.
Right.
We've heard that municipalities are getting very close to having that water turned on soon for that project. But for ag producers, they may have to wait. Is there anything Congress can do to maybe step up that timeline? I know it's a big, complicated project.
Believe me, we're putting a lot of pressure on there. And I talked to the importance of water for especially our irrigators along the High Line. And I mean, that whole Milk River watershed has been in trouble for a long time, not just the St. Mary siphon. And so I do have a bill out there to deal with some of these issues, and we're hoping to get that through. It's the Fort Belknap water, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's out there to deal with the water compact with Fort Belknap, and we put money in there for the St. Mary siphon and making sure we're dealing with that. But it comes down to some really simple issues. I know some folks get worried about spending money on infrastructure, what those price tags look like. And I came out of commercial real estate. When you looked at a project that you were going to buy, one of the things you looked at was deferred maintenance. Mm-hmm. And deferred maintenance is where you're not taking care of a problem early on, and you can take a $100 problem and turn it into a $1,000 problem. And that's kind of what's happened. We haven't dealt with the maintenance in a lot of these critical systems and infrastructure, especially in water infrastructure. And we're stuck in a position right now where they're very expensive fixes because we haven't been taking care of it along the way. But we've definitely put some attention and pressure on that. Like I said, I have a bill in the hopper right now to get some money to do that. I'm glad that it is moving down the road faster than originally we thought, but it can't be too soon, because those irrigators along the High Line are very, very dependent on that. We need to make sure we have not just a short-time fix, but a long-time plan for dealing with the maintenance issues.
All right. Well, as you know, on Saturday, a Minnesota lawmaker was shot and killed, another seriously injured. That sparked a lot of commentary, included, many people are saying, is some lighthearted comments by a sitting member of Congress. But the same day, there were protests in opposition to President Trump's policies.
Well, let me just talk about Minnesota real quickly, because I had the honor of opening up the rodeo in Wilsaw earlier this week, and I took my time with the microphone to talk specifically about that. And I think the political rhetoric and the division it's toxic. It's gone too far. And there's things that I believe that you may not believe, and there's things that you believe that I may not believe, but we need to be able to debate those, in good faith, and with an air of trying to state your position, not to say you're bad or you're evil or you're whatever, take your negative connotations. End of the day, the folks who are making decisions and the folks that run for office, whether they're, independent, Republican, or Democrat, none of them hate this country. None of them want to kill this country. Everybody's doing it for their own reasons. And we need to take the time to understand, where the other side is coming. Because once the rhetoric gets so severe that people start taking, these hostile actions, we can't go down that hole. We need to fight back on that. End of the day, we need to understand that even though we may have differences of opinion on certain issues, at our core, we're Americans. We're all Americans. And one of the things that I brought up at the rodeo last week is, I hate to use such a tragic event, but how can we get back to the September 12th, 2001 America, where we weren't, Republicans, Democrats, poor, rich, blue, green, white, black. We were just Americans, and we all came together. Everybody was holding flags. Everybody was, supporting each other. We were in we had this common connection that we focused on, not on what separated us, but rather what brought us together. How do we get back to that and understand that these debates, even though they can be very spirited, I mean, there's things that I feel very strongly about, and I know there's people that may have a difference of opinion, but you need to be able to debate those respectfully, and not in the air that somebody else is evil or worthy of harm if they don't believe in you. And we need to get rid of that rhetoric and get back to the point that makes us all Americans, is we have differences of opinions. We can work together to find solutions and that at our core, we're still all just Americans.
Yeah, people might be surprised if they just sit down and talk,
Yeah.
that they have a lot more in common than they think.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right. Well, one final question, Congressman. The Montana delegation has received some criticism for their accessibility, not holding some of these in-person town halls. Is that something that you want to do? Or?
I think it's interesting you brought that up just after saying that some people have gotten crazy and been harmed. But there are safety issues. I mean, there are people. A lot of my colleagues are worried about safety issues because they get when you get a big crowd, sometimes there are those that may have gone a little sideways. But I'll tell you, we have been as accessible as we possibly can. And we do teletown halls. We're going around the district meeting with groups, and not political groups, small business groups, chamber groups, no political affiliation, just Montanans, and making sure that we're showing up all across this district and showing up again and showing up again. My team is showing up. We're always open to questions. The problem is with some of these I'll say town halls that have been set up by political activists, is they're not looking to solve problems. They're looking to put you in one of two phases. Either they want to put you in a crowd screaming at you and use that to show how horrible you are, or they want you to not show up and show how horrible you are that you didn't show up. And so what we're doing is we're actually reaching out to people who actually have questions that they can respectfully articulate, and either we're going to have an answer that they like or not, but it's going to be a real answer, and get that out there, make sure that we're talking to them and dealing with their concerns. But if you're in a room of people screaming, no message is getting through and nothing's happening. And I'll just say the teletown halls that we let everybody through, I mean, within the time constraints we have. So we have easy questions, there's softball questions, there's hard questions, we let them all through. And we can get more people on a teletown hall than can fill the Metro in Billings. And I think that's incredibly valuable. That with the time that we spend in district actually showing up at events and showing up with associations and groups across the strata.
Well, I know it's still early in your term as a congressman, although 2 years goes by fast.
It does.
Have you decided whether you're going to run for re-election?
Absolutely. I'm really excited about the committee picks that I got. I worked hard to get onto an A committee. They said it was very difficult for a freshman, but I did. I got into financial services and dealing with a lot of stuff that I have background in and dealt with in my previous job as the Montana State Auditor. So I'm really excited about that. And I think, I'm the first one in decades to actually have that seat. I'm the only Rocky Mountain representative on financial services, which is everything banking, securities, like I said, the digital assets and artificial intelligence, all of that stuff, which is incredibly meaningful. And I'm the only Rocky Mountain representative on that. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I want to just keep showing up, doing the work. I've got 80 plus bills that I've co-sponsored. I've got probably close to a dozen that I've introduced myself, plus or minus, doing serious policy work, and hopefully earn a gavel at some point and start working towards leadership. See if we can actually get a Montana representative that's setting the table, not sitting in the back of the room waiting for somebody else to set it. I think that's going to be meaningful for my district, meaningful for my state.
Well, I know a couple of questions ago I said it was the last question, but I got one more.
Okay.
As you reflect on so far, what's the best part of the job, and what's the most difficult part of the job?
Oh boy, time management is the most difficult part. I'll say that. I've been busier than I ever have, and kind of a funny story. We had somebody brought a bill early on one week that for parliamentary reasons they had to take the votes off the floor for the rest of the week until they figured it out. And the next day I had markup in financial services on our Stablecoin Act, and it took 14 hours to get that through committee. So markup is where you're doing all your final edits before it makes it onto the House floor. And I left my house at 5:15 in the morning. I got back at midnight. And the first thing I see on social media after they took the votes off for the week is somebody call Congressman Downing and tell him to get his, backside back to work. And I'm going, if they had any idea how many hours you put in here. So time management is big, and having a good team is important to make sure that you're handling all the issues that you need to. What I like is we're actually getting things done. And through that fray, most social media, most traditional media, they don't like posting the wins. They like the controversy, and so you see all this fray, this kind of vitriol especially in the social media space. But we're actually getting things done, and we're getting good things done. And a lot of the policy that we're doing on, the regulatory framework we're doing for digital assets, on what I've been doing for energy in Montana, what we've been doing for tax policy, making sure, like I said earlier, that farming and ranching families don't have to sell part of the farm to pay their taxes. All the stuff that we're actually getting things done is really, really exciting to me. Making sure that we're representing this district, which is so diverse. I mean, everywhere from energy to entrepreneurship to agriculture. I mean, there's obviously so many parts of that, and we're actually getting things done, and that's really, really exciting to me.
All right. Well, Congressman Troy Downing, I know that you're a veteran, so thank you for your service.
No, it's my honor.
On that front, and also thank you for stepping up and taking on the service to the country in some very unique times.
Yeah, it is a unique time, and I appreciate you giving me some time here. Hopefully we can catch up again, because there's a lot of moving parts, especially once we get this reconciliation bill back and we can start to get into regular order on solving some other big problems. I'd love to come back on.
All right. Thanks
Outstanding.
a lot.
Well,
right.
thank you.
Thank you.